Welcome back to the crochet tutorial with Cozy Rosie UK, and today I'm very excited to be sharing with you the Strawberry Sunday Hexi cardigan. So this granny hexagon cardigan is not made just using the granny stitch. There are a couple of variations in there as well, and it's actually using my Strawberry Sunday stitch pattern that I released last year as a table runner. We're not going to look like we're wearing a table runner though, I assure you. My testers have made both a striped version and a solid version, and I think both look absolutely perfect. I am working mine up in 3 different colours. Of course, why not? Let's go bold if we're going something for summer. I'm going to be using this Stylecraft Naturals bamboo cotton, which is a 60% bamboo, 40% cotton blend. It's a size 3 DK weight yarn. They come in large 100-gram balls, and if I can show you the meterage, with a whopping 250 meters per ball. Now I'm going to be making an extra large for myself, and I'm using these 3 shades here. As you can see from these beautiful cardigans made by my testers, you can opt to make it in 1 color, 3 colors, 6 colors. It's entirely up to you. So this color is going to be used as color A for me, which is Mulberry, shade number 7250. That's color A for me. Color B, I'm going to be using the shade Natural, which is number 7146. And colour C, I can't resist it, I have to have it somewhere, is this beautiful Blossom, shade number 7167. And they're all from the same range, and I love how silky this feels. It almost, because of the blend of the yarn, it almost feels cool to the touch. And although it looks like I'm using quite a large amount of yarn and it's going to weigh an absolute ton, I've made beach cover-ups in this before and it works out so lightweight. It's absolutely ideal as a warm weather wearable. I'm going to be using a 4mm crochet hook throughout this pattern. Of course, I would recommend that you do check gauge. And actually the way that we check our gauge in this pattern is we're going to be working rounds 1 to 5 and then measuring one of those edges to check that it's the same size. You can of course just follow the measurements to create your cardigan depending on which size you're going to be making. You can see on the schematic here that we're looking for an overall size of the hexagon panels depending on which size that you are making. So for an extra small, you're going to be making a panel size of 14 inches, the same as a small, and then a medium is going to be making an 18-inch panel. And then a large all the way up to a 5XL, we're going to be making a panel size of 20 inches. We're going to be making 2 panels, but before we join them, we're going to be adding on some extra width at the back on each panel, and then we're going to be adding an extra little bit of width if needed, depending on which size you're making, onto the front as well. You can then adapt which finished length you want to create. I'm just going to use all the yarn I have left over until I've reached the finished length. But the reason that I've created this with a fixed panel size is to prevent any of the sizes ending up with super huge sleeve sizes. Instead, I've added some extra width onto the back panels and onto the front to prevent those sleeves getting too large. Looking at the size chart here, you can see the amount of yarn you need depending on which size that you are making. It will of course depend on which finished size you want to make. So first things first, grab the colour that you're using for round 1. That's going to be your colour A for me. That's going to be this mulberry colour here. And then let's get cracking making our Strawberry Sunday hexagons. Now our first few rounds do go very quickly, so make sure you've got either a tape measure or a ruler so we can check gauge after round 5. We're going to start by making a slip knot and placing that onto our hook. And we're going to begin by making a chain of 4. So we just yarn over and pull through 4 times. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we're going to slip stitch back into that first chain that we made. We're going to slip stitch by yarning over, pulling it through and straight through the loop on our hook to create a ring there in the middle, and we're going to be working into the center of that ring. We then make a chain of 5, so we yarn over and pull through 5 times. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now this chain 5 counts as 1 double crochet and a chain 2, and then we need to locate the middle of our ring, which is a little bit harder when this yarn's thinner. You see how you've got that lovely big hole? We want to ignore that one and go into the center ring underneath. So we're going to yarn over and we're going to be working 2 double crochets and a chain 2 5 times. And we need to find that center of the ring. So once we've yarned over, re-find the center, not where we've slip stitched, yarn over, insert into the middle of the ring. We're going to yarn over, bring our loop up, make that, just kind of twiddle it so you can see what I'm doing. Then we're going to yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and that creates our first double crochet. We're going to yarn over to make a second, and again we're working back into the center of our ring. So yarn over, insert, bring our loop up, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So we've got 2 double crochets, and this is our beginning chain 5. So we've got 2 double crochets. We're then going to make a chain of 2. So we yarn over, pull through, and then we yarn over and pull through again for our second chain. And we're going to repeat this by working 2 double crochets and a chain 2. So this counts as number 1. We're going to do that for a total of 5 times. So we yarn over, insert back into the center of our ring again, working our double crochet. We yarn over to work a second double crochet back into the center of our ring. And then we're working our chain of 2. So that's our second time out of 5. So once again, we're yarning over and working 2 double crochets. So that's 1. Yarn over for number 2, again working back into the center of our ring. And then we make our chain of 2. So we've got 1, 2, 3 pairs of double crochets and a chain 2 after each. So we're yarning over to work our 4th pair of double crochets. So that's 1 and 2. Once we've done that pair, we make our chain of 2. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the 5th and final time. So we're yarning over and working 2 double crochets. So that's 1 and 2. We make our chain of 2. So that's our 5th pair. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each time we've done a chain 2 after that pair. And then we're going to finish by working a double crochet back into the center of our ring, and we're going to be joining to that 3rd chain of our beginning chain that we made. So there's 1, 2, there's number 3, and we're leaving those other 2 chains. So count up from the base of your ring. So there's chain 1, chain 2, and we're going to join by inserting our hook through the middle of that chain, and we're just going to slip stitch to join, so that we now have, at the end of round 1, we have 6 pairs of double crochets and 6 chain 2 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pairs of 2 double crochets, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 chain 2 spaces. I'm going to slip stitch into that chain 2 space and then make a little chain 1, because we're going to fasten off this colour and rejoin colour B. Then once we've fastened off, we can just bring that loop through to secure, and then this is the important bit, because we need to know which is our right side and which is our wrong side, because we're actually going to turn after each round. So we are simply going to make sure that we turn our work at the end of each round, so that we have, in this case, we have the wrong side facing. So our middle tail is facing us, and we're going to be rejoining in any one of our chain 2 spaces. So I'm simply just going to insert my hook through any of these chain 2 spaces in between the pairs, ready to join colour B. I'm just going to place that over. You can tie it on if you want to. I'm just going to flick mine through so the tail comes through, and then tie this new colour on to secure, leaving a tail long enough to weave in later. Really important that you have the wrong side facing you when you begin round 2. And the reason that we're turning in each round is when we add on the additional width at the back panels and the front panels, they're going to be worked in turned rows. So we're going to turn with each round as well. So once you've joined in any chain 2 space, we're going to yarn over and bring our new colour through, ready to begin with a chain of 4. I'm going to make sure I'm the right side of my knot here. So we insert, yarn over and bring that new colour up and work our chain of 4, 2, 3 and 4. For this round, our chain 4 counts as a double crochet and a chain 1. We're then going to work into that same chain 2 space, working a second double crochet. Pull through 2 and pull through 2. So what we've done with our chain 4 that counts as a double crochet, chain 1, we've then worked another double crochet. We've effectively created a V-stitch. We're going to make a chain of 3, 1, 2 and 3, and this creates one of our hexagon corners. So we yarn over and we're working back into the same chain 2 space, working a further double crochet, a chain 1 and another double crochet to create a V-stitch into that same chain 2 space. Once we've worked that double crochet, we're going to end with a chain of 1 after that V-stitch, and it should look a little bit pointy because these are going to become the corners. So once you've worked that chain 1, we're going to continue working around into each chain 2 space, working 1 V-stitch, a chain 3 and another V-stitch. So we yarn over, insert into the next chain 2 space, skipping over those 2 double crochets. So we work a double crochet, a chain 1 and a second double crochet, and that creates our V-stitch. We then work a chain of 3 to create our corner, and we work a second V-stitch into that same chain 2 space. So that's a double crochet, a chain 1, and a second double crochet into that same chain 3 space, followed by a chain 1 to finish. So there we have a nice little point with a V-stitch on each side. We're going to repeat that into the next space, into the next chain 2 space between these double crochets. So we're yarning over, working a double crochet, a chain 1 and another double crochet to create our V-stitch. We then make our chain of 3 to create the corner, and we're then working a second V-stitch into that same chain 2 space. So that's a double crochet, chain 1 and a second double crochet, and then we finish with a chain 1 to take us across to our next chain 2 space. We're repeating that once again, working our V-stitch, which is a double crochet, chain 1 and another double crochet. We chain 3 to create the corner space, and then we're working a second V-stitch into that same chain 2 space. So that's that double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, and to step across to the next chain 2 space, we just make a chain 1. I'm going to repeat that into the last of those chain 2 spaces that we have. Just going to do them with you now. So we're doing a V-stitch with a chain 1 in between those 2 double crochets. We make our chain 3 to create the corner, and then we follow with another V-stitch with that double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, ending with a chain 1, and you can see it creates like a hexagon, 6-sided star effectively. So we're just going to work that final V-stitch, a chain 3 and a final V-stitch into that last chain 2 space. We're going to make a chain of 1 and we're joining to the top of that chain 3 that we started the round with. Oops. And I am going to slip stitch across the next stitch and into that chain 2 space. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides. It's probably a little bit hard to see when I've got that end, but we're going to have ends throughout this. So we've got, oh, there we go, that looks better. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. It's not going to be perfectly straight. We don't want it to be perfectly straight really at any point. It shouldn't be curling at this point, obviously, but we are going to be folding it at the end of round 5 to show you that cardigan shape. So once you've slip stitched across to your chain, you don't have to do that, it's completely optional. I'm going to make, I always slip stitch across into the next bigger chain 2 space, and then we can make our little chain 1 and we can fasten off, ready to rejoin our ready to join our next colour into any of our chain 3 spaces, which are the points here in between. So I'm going to be joining, oh, don't lose that end. Don't forget we need to turn at the end of our row, or the end of our round. I'm just going to bring that end through so it's on the wrong side as well. So I can make sure that my right side is pretty much clear of ends. So making sure that you now have the right side of your project facing, we're going to be joining into any of our chain 3 spaces, so that look like points. And again, I'm just going to fasten mine on by making a knot, because this is a little bit slippy, this yarn, so it does need to be woven in. I can't get away with just tying it on. Once you've secured that yarn, and I'm working with colour C, we're going into round 3, making sure that our last round has the wrong side facing us. Just going to insert my hook into that chain 3 space and bring that yarn up. We're then going to make a chain of 4. That's 2, 3, and 4. And this round we are working V-stitches in our corners and 3 double crochets, our granny stitch, in between. So once you've made your chain 4, that counts as a double crochet and a chain 1. We're going to yarn over and work a second double crochet to create that V-stitch. We repeat our corner working a chain of 3, and we're working another V-stitch back into that chain 3 space. So that's a double crochet, a chain 1, and a second double crochet back into that same chain 3 space. So we're just repeating the corner we worked on the last round. Once you've finished your V-stitch, don't forget to make your chain of 1. And we are then going to skip over the first V-stitch. We're going to work into the space in between the V-stitches. So into that chain 1 space we created, not the chain 1 space in between our V-stitches. Making sure that you've done that chain 1, we're going to yarn over, and into these spaces we are working our granny stitch. So we're working 3 double crochets into that same chain 1 space. So we yarn over, insert, bring our loop up, working 1 double crochet, and we're going to work a further 2 into that same chain 1 space. So that's 1, 2, and there's number 3. Once you've worked your 3rd double crochet, we can then chain 1 to step over the next V-stitch, ready to work into our chain 3 corner space. Into our chain 3 corner space, we're working our V-stitch. So we work 1 double crochet, a chain 1, and a second double crochet. To keep that corner shape, we make our chain of 3, and then we're working back into our chain 3 space, working our second V-stitch. So that's a double crochet, a chain 1, and a second double crochet. We're then going to make our chain of 1 before we step over that next V-stitch, ready to work into that chain 1 space in between them, working 3 double crochets. Make sure you get into the chain 1 space in between. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Once you've worked your 3 double crochets, we're going to chain 1 to step over the next V-stitch, and we're ready to work back into our corner, working our V-stitch, chain 3, followed by another V-stitch. which is our double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, we chain 3 to recreate that corner shape before working a further V-stitch, which is a double crochet, chain 1, and another double crochet. We of course finish that with a chain 1, and it takes us back to our chain 1 space where we're repeating what we've just worked, working our 3 double crochet into that space. Continue to repeat that, and I'll meet you at the end of the round to join, where we'll be changing back to colour A. I've just worked my last 3 double crochets, and we're just going to be joining to the top of, well, the 3rd chain from where we joined. So there's 1, 2 and 3, and we leave that 1 chain unworked because that counts as our double crochet V-stitch. So we're just joining into that 3rd chain. I'm going to slip stitch into the chain 1 this time without having to carry it too far, and then I'm ready to fasten off for the end of round 3. So at the end of round 3, if I place it down, you might see that it's starting to flap about a bit already, and it will ripple even more after the next round. So in each side you should have your corner with your V-stitch, so V-stitch, chain 3 corner, a chain 1 and a 3 double crochet, chain 1, and then your V-stitch corner once again, and you should still have 6 sides. Right now it just looks like a really cute kind of 6-sided star, but we are ready to turn our work, because remember, we need to see the wrong side of that last round that we worked, and we're going to be joining in any chain 3 space, but this time we're rejoining with colour A. So you'll be joining in between your V stitches here where that chain 3 space is. I'm just going to tie mine on just for ease. Now with round 4, we're going to be introducing our final stitch. So far we have V stitches and granny stitches. So we start by inserting our hook and just bringing it back through, ready to make a chain of 3. And this chain 3 counts as our first double crochet of the round. We're going to make a further 2 double crochets. So that's the second one and our third. And that creates our first granny stitch. So we have our chain 3 and 2 further double crochets. We're going to make our corner chain 3 to keep that corner space, and then we're working a further 3 double crochets into that same chain 3 space. So that's 1, 2 and 3. We're going to finish with a chain 1 ready to step over. We're going to skip over our V-stitch, and we're working into this chain 1 space, and we're going to be working the granny spike. So we yarn over and we're working our double crochet into that chain 1 space in between those groups. So we work our double crochet, and for the granny spike stitch we're going to be working our spike 2 rows below. So this is the first row we're skipping, and we're going to be working into that V-stitch 2 rows below. So we yarn over, we're inserting our hook not into the same space but another row down in between those V's. We're going to yarn over. I'm releasing the tension a little bit because I want to bring it up to the same height as my current row. We then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and this is known on its own as a long double crochet, because as you can see it's all the way down an extra row lower. To finish the granny spike stitch, we're working back into the same chain 1 space we worked the first double crochet, and it's going to be kind of hidden behind where you've just done your spike. So just move that work out of the way to work your final double crochet. And it should look a little bit like that. So you're spiking 2 rows down, so that's 1 and 2, working into that V-stitch 2 rows below. We're going to make a chain 1 to step over our 3 double crochet there, ready to work our next granny spike stitch into the next. So we yarn over, we're working into, we're working into that chain 1 space, working our first double crochet. We're then going to work our long double crochet 2 rows below into that V-stitch. So I'm yarning over, inserting, releasing the tension a bit to bring it up to the right height. Then we can yarn over, pull through 2 loops, and yarn over to pull through the last 2, and then we need to work our final double crochet of the 3 into that chain 1 space where we worked the first. Of course, we finish with our chain 1, and obviously if we had no ends it would be absolutely beautiful, but this is the reality, and it should be looking a little bit like that. You don't want to be scrunching up this row, it should be kind of sitting quite normally. That's probably a little bit loose there. I'd rather it was too loose than too tight, and as you can see it almost fills in the gaps in between but still keeps it light and airy. Making sure you've done your chain 1, we're going to be working into our V-stitch corner here, but this time we're working 3 double crochets. That's my dog snoring as always. So that's number 2 and number 3, followed by a chain of 3, and then we're working a further 3 double crochets into that same chain 3 corner space. That's 2 and 3. We need to make our chain 1 to step over this V-stitch here, and this time we're working our spike stitch working into that V-stitch 2 rows below. So we're yarning over into that chain 1 space, working our first double crochet, then we're yarning over, working our long double crochet all the way down into that row 2 rows below. So that's 1, 2, so we insert into that V-stitch, bring our loop up to the same height, pull through 2 and pull through 2. We're then going to work our third double crochet into the same chain 1 space as that first double crochet that we worked. Bring that tail out of the way. We're then going to make our chain 1 to step over our 3 double crochet from the previous row, and we're back to working our next granny spike stitch into the next chain 1 space. So we work our first double crochet, we yarn over, ready to work into that V-stitch 2 rows below, bring our loop up, pull through 2, pull through 2, and finish working a double crochet into that same chain 1 space, just kind of behind that long double crochet. Making a chain 1, and then into that corner once again with that chain 3 space, we are working 3 double crochets, a chain 3 and a further 3 double crochets. 2 and 3, and make a chain 1 at the end, of course, to step over. So continue to repeat those sides on each side. Move that out of the way so that you can see I have done that spike there. So we're working a chain 1 in between, a chain 1 followed by a granny spike stitch, which is worked into the V-stitch 2 rows below, chain 1 in between, granny spike, chain 1, you're back to your corner working 3 double crochets, a chain 3, 3 double crochets and a chain 1. Repeat that around and I will meet you at the end of round 4, ready to go into round 5, where we're finishing up our pattern repeat with just 2 rows to go. So once you've worked all the way around, working that last spike stitch, finishing that little chain 1, we're joining to the top of our 3rd chain. You just join to the top of that 3rd chain. You can either fasten off here, ready to help cover those ends, and fasten off, ready to change colour once again. So as I mentioned, it is going to ripple at the end of round 4, and that is exactly what we want because we've actually increased too many times for it to lay flat. And you can get one edge straight, which is kind of the point. And even from here, you can almost create your cardigan shape. So all you have to do is pick an end and put your edges together, and it will create that tiny little cardigan. It's perfect for a dolly. We're not measuring just yet. We are nowhere near the right size to be measuring to check our gauge. So of course, once you've fastened off, make sure you have turned your work so that you have, I turned already, so you've got the wrong side of your stitch facing. for the next round, you've actually got your right side facing overall here. So we're going to be joining into any of our chain 3 spaces, but this time we are joining with colour B. Once again, I'm just going to be fastening that colour into that chain 3 space, making sure that I have the wrong side of the previous row, or round, sorry, facing me. So you can see that's the wrong side of my 3 double crochets there. So for round 5, as I said, we're joining into any chain 3 corner space. We're going to yarn over to bring that hook through the middle, and we're going to start with a chain of 4. That's 1, 2, 3 and 4, and we're back to our V-stitch rounds. So this counts as a double crochet and a chain 1. We're going to yarn over and work another double crochet into that same chain 3 corner space, followed by a chain 3 to maintain that corner space. We are then going to work a further V-stitch into that same chain 3 space, which is 1 double crochet, a chain 1 and a second double crochet, all worked into that same chain 3 space. We finish with a chain 1, of course, to help us step across. So you've now got 2 V-stitches and a chain 3 space in your corner. We're actually not skipping over this granny stitch here, because we're going to be working into the middle of each of these 3 double crochet clusters or granny stitches, which is easy to see and recognize with your spike stitch, not quite so much when you're working into this first one after the corner. You still need to do your chain 1, and what we're going to be doing is working a V-stitch into the middle stitch of each of those 3 double crochet groups. So we're skipping 1 double crochet, yarning over and working into the middle stitch, so the second stitch. So we skip 1, working into the middle stitch, we're working our V-stitch, so we're working a double crochet, a chain 1 and a second double crochet, followed by a chain 1. We're skipping this chain 1 space, skipping the next, and this time we're working into the middle of our granny spike stitch, working the V-stitch. So it will be in that middle stitch once again of that 3 group, and we're going for the middle one to work our V-stitch once again. So that's double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, and then we make a chain 1 to skip over that chain 1 space. Once again, we're going to be working a V-stitch into the middle of that 3 double crochet group, which is kind of where that long double crochet is. So double crochet, chain 1 and a double crochet. We finish with a chain 1. We're skipping that chain 1 space, skipping the next double crochet, working into the middle stitch of that 3 double crochet group, working a V-stitch once again. So double crochet, chain 1 and a double crochet. We're going to make a chain 1 to step over into our chain 3 corner space where we are working our V-stitch, and then we make our chain 3 to maintain the corner. Oops. So that's our second V-stitch, and of course we finish with a chain 1. So this is our pattern. I hope you can see that they're worked into the middle of those 3 double crochet clusters, so our chain 1 spaces are actually in line for this round. I'll work the next round, the next side with you again. So we're skipping that first double crochet and we're working a V-stitch into the middle stitch of that 3 double crochet cluster. So that's that double crochet, chain 1 and a second double crochet. We chain 1, skipping our chain 1 space and that next double crochet to work into the middle of our spiked 3 double crochet granny stitch, working another V-stitch. Make sure you make that chain 1 afterwards. Skip the chain 1, skip the next stitch, working into the middle with another V-stitch. And of course we make that chain 1 to step across, skip that chain 1, work it into that middle stitch of that 3 double crochet group, working another V-stitch. We then make a chain of 1 and we're back to our corner where we're working our V-stitch, chain 3 and another V-stitch. Once you've worked your final V-stitch, don't forget to do your chain 1, and then we're going to continue to repeat that around for the remaining sides. So I think we've done 2, you've got 3 more to do, and I'll meet you once you've worked all the way around, because we're going to be measuring our finished edge to check our gauge matches, well, to check your gauge matches my gauge so that you can get the right finished size. So continue working those next 3 sides, working that V-stitch into the center stitch of your 3 double crochet clusters, making sure you work your chain 1 in between, and then I'll meet you at the end of round 5 where we can join and measure our gauge. So once you've worked around each of those 6 sides, we are going to join to our 3rd chain, 1, 2 and 3. Make sure you've done that last chain 1. And then just slip stitch to join. I'm going to slip stitch into that chain 1, so it just helps define it a bit better. And then we can fasten off, and at this point we are ready to measure a flat edge. So, and this is how we can check our gauge. So you should be looking a little bit like that, and you want to make it so that it is completely flat, which is why I'm going to use a ruler to measure mine. So let's do it upside down actually. So you want to meet your first corner at the start. This is 4 inches. We're looking to get it to 4.5, but as you can see, it's not flat. So I'm going to stretch it ever so slightly so that it is a flat line, and you should be measuring 4.5 inches across one edge at the end of round 5. See if I can turn that all around for you so it actually proves that I'm meeting my own gauge. So there's my corner. And when it's only a very light stretch just to get it to, it's just because I need it to look like it will look if it was blocked. So if you imagine this is, it's hard to explain. This fabric is very stretchy, so it's important that we do get gauge at this point, and we're not measuring it when it's all flat and crinkly. We want it to hit about 4.5 inches at this point. You can follow the measurements, but you will want to measure your edge so that it is flat. It's really important that you measure it that way. So hopefully you are measuring 4.5 inches. When you separate your stitches out, it measures those 4.5 inches. When you've got a flat edge, not an edge like that, make sure that it is parallel. No, it is flat, is basically, and it's kind of measuring from the center of the corner to the center of the corner. It should measure 4.5 inches. If you've reached that, you've achieved gauge. Congratulations. If it's ever so slightly off, please don't worry too much. You'll probably find, as I should show you, this is a really stretchy fabric, and the weight of this will cause quite a lot of drape. So you don't want this to be overly big at this point. In fact, I'd rather it was smaller. So as I said, to fold, you would just bring 2 corners together and it creates your tiny little cardigan shape. Probably an easier way to measure it actually is to lay it flat and then measure to make sure you're incredibly close to your 4.5 inches. Oh, helps you don't move it. Yeah, bang on. So there we are, we have a mini cardigan, but we need to continue on to round 6, joining colour C. So C for me is that lovely light pink. And again, we're joining in any of our chain 3 spaces. I nearly forgot, we need to make sure we have the wrong side of our last round facing us. So I'm just going to pop my hook through. So I've got the kind of more bobbly side of our stitches facing us when we join. And again, I'm just going to tie it on just to keep it in place. and we're working our second round of V-stitches. So we're just going to yarn over and bring that through. We're starting with a chain of 4 to count as our first double crochet and our chain 1, working our V-stitch corner. So we're working a double crochet, then we do our chain 3 to create our first V-stitch, and we work a second V-stitch into the same chain 3 corner space. Of course, we make our chain 1. We're stepping over the V-stitch and we are working in between our V-stitches, not into those chain 1 spaces in the middle, but in between the 2 V-stitches, and we're working a V-stitch. So we double crochet, chain 1 and a second double crochet, then we make a chain 1 to step over the next V-stitch, working into that next chain 1 space with another V-stitch. Chain 1 to step over, working into the next chain 1 space, not into the middle of the V-stitches. We then chain 1 after the V-stitch, continuing again, working another V-stitch into that next chain 1 space across. One more to work, and then we'll be back into our corner. Make sure you've done your chain 1 after. Into our corners we are working a chain 1, oh no, not. We're working 1 V-stitch, a chain 3 and another V-stitch. Do our chain 1, of course, to step over, working into the chain 1 spaces in between our V-stitches. We're going to repeat this on all 6 sides of our hexagon, working around, placing 1 V-stitch in between the previous V-stitches, in between the V-stitches of the previous round, making sure that we do a chain 1 after each to step across. In your corners, you're going to be working your V-stitch, chain 3, followed by a V-stitch and a chain 1 to continue across. So work that, nearly forgot, work that around, working your V-stitches and your chain 1s. In your corners, we are working a V-stitch, a chain 3 and a second V-stitch. I always find this the trickiest one. And then of course, just remember to do that final chain 1 after your V-stitch in your corner. And I'm going to then meet you once you've worked this round to talk us through the repeats to get our panels to the size we need, depending on which size hexagon cardigan we are making. So I've worked all the way around, worked my final chain 1, and I'm just going to join to my 3rd chain. 1, 2, 3. Just going to slip stitch into that chain 1 space, ready to fasten off. And at the end of round 6, look at that beautiful mess we've made. We should roughly be looking a little bit like that. It will not be lying flat, but you should now be able to fold it to create your cardigan shape. So for round 7 onwards, we are going to be repeating rounds 3 to 6 a certain number of times, depending on which size you're making. So I'm going to give you the repeats, but then I'm going to show you round 7 because I don't want any confusion about where you're working your spikes, because there weren't as many stitches in between on the previous round. So I'm going to take you through round 7 and 8 after I've talked you through. Not everyone will need those videos. If you're familiar with how these patterns work, then you'll probably be ready to fly with this one. So for extra small and small, you're going to be working rounds 17 to 18, repeating rounds 3 to 6 a further 3 times, or until one flat edge of your hexagon measures 14 inches. Just make sure that you end on a repeat of row 6, because that will help you continue on in the rest of the pattern. For a medium, you're going to be working round 7 up to round 22, again repeating rounds 3 to 6, but this time for a further 6 times, or until that edge measures 18 inches. So for large, all the way up to 5XL, you're working rounds 7 to 26, repeating rounds 3 to 6 a further 5 times. Or of course, until that edge measures 20 inches, making sure you do end on a repeat of round 6. Now you're going to continue to change colour after each round and continuing your colour order, whichever you set up for yourself. And we're going to be finishing that final round working a second round of V-stitches. That'll become more apparent as you move through. As you can see here, we've got 2 V-stitch rounds together, and that's where you should end. Do remember to turn after each round. So you have one wrong side, one right side round. And I'm keeping all of my ends to one side, ready for weaving in. If you are clever enough to remember to carry up your yarn, you're welcome to do so. I just want to crochet, so I would rather weave in the ends. It's also recommended to work both your hexagon panels at the same time. So I would kind of work to this point, then make your second panel, and then you can check that they are the same size. It just means that there's less chance for your tension to change dramatically between working each panels. The other thing to note is that as you continue to make a larger panel, you may notice that you don't get a clean 90-degree angle. In fact, this edge for your sleeve, which will become your sleeve eventually, you can see the shape now, so it's a bit more obvious. It will look a little bit like a bell sleeve as you make that larger, as the size gets larger, which is another reason that we're not making our panels too large. So for those of you who want me to talk you through the next couple of rounds, I'm more than happy to do so. If you're happy with the patterns, you can follow ahead. You can use the timestamps below to repeat rounds 3 to 6, the number of times you need. For those who would like a little bit more help working those next couple of rounds, let's go on to round 7 together. Once again, I'm joining in any chain 3 corner space, and I'm joining my next colour. So there's A, B and C. So I'm going back to colour A, and I'm just going to bring that through and secure that to my chain 3 space. If I can grab it. We are basically repeating round 3, but there are a lot more spaces. So there's round 1, round 2, round 3. We're working a V-stitch in the corner and granny stitches in between. So we're going to yarn over and bring our yarn through, and we're working our chain of 4, which counts as our double crochet and our chain 1 for round 7. And then we're working our V-stitch in the corner with our chain 3 and a second V-stitch in that same corner space. Of course, we make our chain of 1 to step across, because we're not working into the V-stitches. We're going to be working into those chain 1 spaces in between. So we're going to be working 3 double crochets. That's 2 and 3, and followed by a chain 1, and then we're working into each chain 1 space between our V-stitches across, rather than into the V-stitches themselves. So it looks like that. Remember to do your chain 1 after you've worked your 3 double crochets, and then your chain 1, and we're just repeating that all the way across to our corner, working those 3 double crochets followed by a chain 1, working into each chain 1 space across. There's quite a few of them this time, so you should have quite a few 3 double crochets all the way along. You think the last round we did it on, we only had 1. Now we've got a fair few more. We then, once we're in our corners, we're working a V-stitch corner. So we do a V-stitch, which is double crochet, chain 1 and a double crochet, followed by our chain of 3 and a second V-stitch worked into the same chain 3 corner space. We then of course make our chain 1, and then we're going to repeat across, working into the chain 1 spaces between those V-stitches, and we're just going to repeat this all the way around to the end of this round. So this is round 7, which is not listed in the written pattern, but I just want to make sure it's as easy as possible for you. So continue to repeat, working 3 double crochets and a chain 1 between each pair of V-stitches over to your corner, And in your chain 3 corner spaces, we are working our V-stitch, a chain 3 and a further V-stitch followed by a chain 1. So continue around, and if you need it, I'm going to be showing you round 8 as well, just to really help clarify where those spike stitches are worked in these additional rounds. So I've just worked all the way around, repeating that lovely 3 double crochet round. And I'm just going to join to the top of the 3rd chain and a slip stitch there. I'm going to slip stitch over into my chain 3 space. Ready to fasten off. So you should have this repeat so far going up to round 7. And then we are going to do round 8 together as well, because I want you to be super sure what you are doing with regards to your spike stitches. Changing to colour B in this instance, just continuing that colour change. Just going to fasten that into the corner. And we are working a repeat of our spike stitch round this time. So we're going to start with a chain of 3, which counts as our double crochet, and we're working 3 double crochets into that corner. So we have our chain 3 and 2 further double crochets. We make a chain of 3, and then we're working a further 3 double crochets into that same chain 3 corner space, and of course followed by that chain 1. So this is the round where we're working those granny spike stitches. So we're going to be working into the chain 1 spaces once again. Let's move that end. So we're skipping over the V-stitch, working into the chain 1 space. We're working the double crochet, and then we're working, move that across, I don't know why that's gone so far over. And then we're working down into that V-stitch, chain 1 space, 2 rows below. So I'm yarning over, skipping that space, going into the one below, bringing up that long double crochet before working a 3rd double crochet into the back. So hard to show it straight because I hold my crochet quite unevenly. Once you've worked that 3 double crochet spike, we make our chain 1, and we're just repeating that all the way across, working our double crochet, spiking down into that V-stitch 2 rows below for working that 3rd, it's hard to see with that dark yarn, sorry, double crochet into that same chain 1 space. In our corners, we are going to be working our granny stitch, so 3 double crochets, chain 3, 3 double crochets. Once you've worked your spike stitch round, you're back to your 2 V-stitch rounds again, where obviously on the return you're going to be working into the middle stitch, working where that spike was worked. Did I turn? Oh, I didn't turn. I could tell that. Don't forget to turn after each round, you see. You can tell obviously this is the right side, that's the wrong side, so I had joined without turning, so don't make my mistake. It probably doesn't look that obvious now, but as we go on to those back panels, it really will become more obvious. Now, these are just additional rounds that I'm working just because it's not always as clear when we've increased the number of stitches, like where we're working and how different it looks when there are so many more chain 1 spaces. So I don't want any confusion. So I hope these extra showing these extra couple of rounds has really helped, but we are effectively repeating rounds 3 to 6. However many times you needed to repeat them that I gave, that's time stamped for you as well, so that you can see how those stitches look a little bit different when there are more spaces to be worked into, but it is basically repeating, oh, I got caught up there, the same pattern for that number of rounds you need to achieve the correct finish size. So this for round 8, so we're just going to be repeating that spiked round, working into that V-stitch 2 rows below with that long double crochet all the way down there. I love a spike stitch, I really do. So continue to repeat rounds 3 to 6. I hope these extra rounds have been a little bit helpful to show you how different it looks when you have those extra stitches, but yeah, we are skipping over those 3 double crochets, working into the chain 1 space and into that V-stitch chain 1 space underneath. And then of course you're going back to your V-stitch rounds, which are quite a little bit easier to follow because there were more examples in there for rounds 3 to 6. So that would be round 5 and 6 maybe. Yeah. So it's entirely up to you, but rounds 3 to 6 are the ones that we are repeating. Of course, we're changing colours every round in the colour pattern that you've established, unless you are, of course, working in one colour to save weaving in all these ends. So continue to work all the repeats you need to reach that finished size. And I will meet you once you've worked both your panels. Just get them both done, get all the ends woven in, and then we can add those extra width onto our back panel and then move on to our front panel before we are seaming our panels together to create that cardigan shape. So once you have completed your panels, it is now time to add on a back panel to add some extra width. And this is the width across the chest and the back. So there is a front panel and a back panel. Once you've folded it, it will become a lot more apparent. You've got your sleeve here, and then across where this section is becomes your front and your back panel, and we're going to seam the backs together. Let me move this out of the way because I can make it a little bit more obvious, because I've already worked the back panel onto one side or one of my panels. So I've worked all of the rows just so I can show you what they look like, and you can adapt the width that you make across the back and the front. It's entirely up to you. This pattern is so customizable in that respect. You can literally make it your own. So the first thing you're going to notice is that I've got some stitch markers already in place, and I would recommend placing stitch markers in your front panel and your back panel before you start either of them. Just know which one is which. So I have chosen to use different colour markers for the different panels. So at this point I've got white stitch markers for my front panel and red markers for my back panel. And before you go ahead and mark, you need to check, if I fold that out of the way, that the panels are facing the same way. So for me, on my last round, I have the right side of the stitches facing me. Do I? No, I actually have the wrong side. I can tell more by looking at this 3 double crochet grouping here. That's the right side. So right side, wrong side, right side, wrong side. So if I was to compare these last 4 rows, I want all these stitches to be facing the same way. So I need the right side of this stitch to be facing, which it is not. But that could be more to do with how I made it. If you got them wrong at any point, just make sure that your final rounds match and you've got the right side of those facing. It's going to affect how you rejoin your yarn and where you rejoin. So the first thing we're going to do is to mark the back panel corners. So once your panel is placed in the cardigan shape, we're going to mark the chain 3 space, so the corner space effectively, with stitch markers. So I'm going to mark the top and the bottom, and then I'm going to mark the corresponding chain 3 space in a different colour, just so I know which is which, so I know which side is which. The problem is once you pick this up and move it, it's hard to remember which edge you're working across, and this just makes it more obvious when you've got both those corners marked. And if you're using a colour system like me, you will know which is the front side and which is the back side. So I've got my corners matched here. As I've said, the additional rows that you work is a little bit up to you. Just bear in mind that this is going to add, you're going to be adding the same amount of width on each of your panels. So in this case, because I've worked additional rows from my last corner row, which was this one here, I have worked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows to give me an extra 2 inches. I'm going to add an extra 2 inches onto here. So it's going to add width to your project, and it's going to add width between your front panels. So if you imagine if we have another 2 inches, and then I'm going to have this much space between my front panels, because that's where it ends here. So it just means that we're creating a nice space for our neck, and it's up to you if you want to make it more oversized. It is designed already with a 6-inch ease across your bust, and the neck spacing does account for that. And then on those larger sizes, we can work onto the front panel to increase or decrease the gap between your neck as well if you want to. But adding on to the front is entirely optional. If you want a more relaxed fit, then you can leave the front panel additions off. So once you have marked your chain 3 spaces for both your front and your back panel, we're going to start by working onto the back panel with the wrong side facing us. So let me move this one out of the way. So we are going to start the back panel with the wrong side facing us. You've already determined which side is right and wrong now by where you've placed your markers. So you should have the inside of your cardigan now facing you. To ensure that you do create both a left and a right panel, when you're joining your yarn into that first chain 3 space, you need to have your sleeves positioned on different sides. So for the first panel, let's say you're creating your left panel, like I'm going to do with this one, you need to be joining with your sleeve on your left. And then for your right panel, you need to position it so that your sleeve is kind of coming down on the right hand side. Obviously, if you're left-handed, you need to swap those over because your asterisks will be on the other side. I hope that makes sense. And we're going to join into the first marked corner space. Now in the written pattern it says in the next colour, simply because at this point you will have worked however many rounds you need to do, and the colour technique isn't quite as obvious. So I know that my next colour, I'm working 3 colours, so I'm joining my next colour, which is that light pink, and we're just joining in that corner. You can tie on again if you want to. I think it really has made my weaving in a little bit easier because there were a lot of ends. I'm going to leave that marked just so I know which is the front and the back, just in case any become detached. So with the wrong side facing, join in your first chain 3 now corner space, and we're going to yarn over and pull that yarn through, and we're making a chain of 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Now this chain 5 counts as a double crochet and a chain 2, and we're going to skip over this first V-stitch, working into our chain 1 spaces between the V-stitches, and we're working 3 double crochets. That's our next round to work. So that's 1, 2, and 3, and of course we follow that with a chain of 1. So we will now look a little bit like this. It does look like that's not enough space, but there is enough here for your corner to work perfectly. Make sure you've done your chain 1 in between, and then we are going to be working into each chain 1 space between our V stitches, working a 3 double crochet and chain 1. And we're going to work all the way across to our next marked stitch for our back panel. So once you've worked all the way across to your next marker or your next chain 3 corner space, you've done your chain 1, we're going to work an extra chain 1. And once we've worked that extra chain 1, we're going to work a final double crochet into that chain 3 corner space. So you should have a nice big space between your last 3 double crochets. So you've got chain 2 effectively there. Now we don't have to fasten enough because we're working 3 colours. You're going to be back at this row point at some point anyway, but if you want to fasten off, which I will, you can just do a chain 1, or you can change colour in that last stitch before you turn, just by working half your stitch in your current colour, and before you fasten off, before you finish that stitch, we can change to our next colour, which for me is that dark purple. I can find the end. There we go. And then you can just complete that final stitch in the next colour that you're working with. Going into row 2, with our next colour, we're making a chain of 4, and we are turning, and we're going to work back along the same row we've just made, but we're starting in that chain 2 space. So we've done our turning chain of 4, and then we're working into that chain 2 space, working our spiked double crochet. So we work the first double crochet into that chain 2 space, and we're spiking down into that V stitch below, making that long double crochet into that V stitch 2 rows below, before working our next double crochet into that same chain 3 corner space once again. We then make our chain of 1 to step across those 3 double crochets, and we're going to be working our spike 3 double crochet, or our granny spike stitch, all the way across back to that next corner space. It's no longer a chain 3 space, making sure we do that chain 1 in between. So just as we were doing before, working our spike into that V stitch 2 rows below, but this time we're just working along one side, so it works up a lot quicker. So continue across, working your 3 double crochet spike, working it into that V stitch 2 rows below, and I'll meet you when you reach back to when you work back across to where we began row 1. So once you've worked all the way across to that chain 5 space, well, it's really a chain 2 space, we're going to work, move that end out the way, we're going to work a spike stitch first and foremost into that corner space. So double crochet, work your long DC into that V stitch 2 rows below. We're going to work, if we can find it, our final double crochet of those, that 3 double crochet spike into that same space. I'm going to make a chain 1, and then we're going to find our 3rd chain to work our final double crochet into that 3rd chain. 1, 2, 3. Is that 1, 2? I think it might be that's my 3rd chain. And then we're ready to change to our next colour. If you're carrying up, you're welcome, of course, just to join that next colour in just before you finish that last stitch. So the pattern is written so the extra small, medium and large will fasten off at this point. You should be adding about an inch and a half to your back panel. It's entirely up to you how many rows you do. If you want to create a wider neckline than the schematic says, then you can work an additional couple of rows. Just remember you'll be adding that width onto the other panel as well. So don't go too mad, or else you'll end up with a really wide neckline that will almost start to hang off of your shoulders. So if you are following the pattern as written, extra small, medium and a large will be fastening off at this point. So we're going to go into row 3, and we're going to start with a chain of 4 in our next colour. I'm going to turn slightly differently because I've still got my other colour attached and I don't want to get tangled, so let me move that over there. Okay, so once you've turned, we're going to work a double crochet into the same chain that we've just done that chain 4. I'm going to pick up those ends. So where our chain 4 is coming out of, we are yarning over and working a double crochet into that same place as our chain 4, which we don't normally do, but we're effectively creating a V stitch at the start of this row. If I move my ends, it'll be a little bit easier to see. So we now have a V stitch. We're going to chain 1. We're going to skip that first double crochet in the next chain 3 spike, and working our V-stitch into the long DC from our previous spike. Just like we were doing before, we're just working our V-stitch into that long double crochet from the row before. Just this time we're working in rows. Of course, we make our chain 1 and we skip over the chain 1 space, skip the next double crochet, working our next V-stitch into where that long double crochet is from the previous row, just as we were doing before. Remember to do your chain 1 in between and continue across, working those V-stitches. So continue to repeat that across, and I'll meet you back at your next corner where we're going to finish off this row together. So once you've worked all the way across to that last spike stitch, we're just going to work our V-stitch into the long double crochet, from the row before, make our chain 1. We skip that last double crochet there, working our final double crochet into that third chain. Helps if I hold it straight. So we're getting a nice straight edge here. So at the end of row 3, small and extra small can fasten off and repeat this section for their second panel. Of course, if you want to continue to add even more width, you can, and continue on to the next row. Just remember that you need to add the additional width onto the other panel as well. So it does get pretty large pretty quickly, so don't go too mad with it. So sizes 2XL, 3XL and 4 and 5XL are continuing on to row 4. I'm just changing back to my next colour in my sequence, which is of course that light pink. And we begin row 4 with a chain of 4. We can then turn, and of course we're working our V-stitch row, so we're not going to work into this chain 1 space underneath or into the V-stitch, working into those chain 1 spaces in between. So we're working our V-stitch as normal into the chain 1 space between each of the V-stitches from the previous row. And we're just going to repeat that all the way across, working 1 V-stitch into the chain 1 spaces between the V-stitch, followed by chain 1 of course, into each of those chain 1 spaces across, back to our corner. So continue to repeat that across to the end of the row, and I'll meet you for the corner. So once you've worked all the way across, you'll be thinking, I've got too many V-stitches left. We're going to work in between those last V-stitches, working another V-stitch of course, make our chain 1, and we're working our double crochet into the top of that third chain that we made in the previous row for our turning chain. And I've twisted mine for some reason. 1, 2, 3, there we are. There we go. So it should look a little bit like that on this end. So you've still got a bit of a V-stitch left. We've now added 4 rows on, and if you're making a 2XL, you're welcome to fasten off at this point. For a 3, 4 and a 5XL, you're going to repeat rows 1 to 2, so those first 2 rows that we did for rows 5 and 6, and then a 3XL can fasten off. A 4 and a 5XL are going to work row 7, repeating row 3, with a 4XL fastening off after row 7, and then finally row 5, 5XL is going to repeat row 4 before fastening off and repeating all of those rows on their second panel. Once you've worked your back panels, of course, you are ready to go on to the front panel. Now the front panels are only worked by a 2, 3, 4 and 5XL. So if you're an extra small up to an extra large, you can jump ahead onto the joining and seaming of the back panels. For the rest of you, I'm going to meet you to work your front panels. So for the front panel, this is only for sizes 2, 3, 4 and 5XL. And this time, if I change mine around, with your front panel marked, you need to be joining with the right side facing you. So obviously this final row that you worked needs to have the right side facing. So I've got mine back to front. And you're going to be joining into that first marked chain 3 space. So for the back panel, we joined with the wrong side facing us, and for our front panels, we want the right side facing us. Now you're simply going to repeat the rows as we worked in the back panel, and I'm going to talk you through which rows you need to work. For your front panels, we're going to be working the same as we worked our back panels. So you're just going to repeat row 1 and row 2, and then 2XL and 3XL will be fastening off before continuing on to seaming the back and shoulders. And then size 4 and 5XL will continue on to repeat row 3 to 4 and then fasten off their front panels, continuing on to seaming their back and shoulders. So once you've added both the back panel and the front panel rows as required, it is time to seam our panels together. So the first part we're going to seam is our back panels together, but you need the right side of your back panel facing. So I'm going to swap these over. The right side of my back panels facing, and all my ends, I'm sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry, but hey ho. The way that I'm going to recommend joining your 2 panels is with a flat slip stitch seam. It will be completely flat, and we will have these side panels and we'll have this back panel beautifully butted up together. You are going to need your hook for this. We are not sewing this. We are going to be quick and easy and do this with our crochet hooks. So this is something I rarely do, but I am actually going to place my slip knot onto my hook to start this. I'm going to start by inserting my hook through the 3rd chain of this one, but you'll notice that it's coming out the back of the panel. So it's going through the right side out of the back loop, and then I'm going to do the same on that first stitch, going in from the front out. I've done that wrong. Yeah, through the front out the back, and my yarn is actually going to be worked from underneath my panel. So I'm simply going to make sure that my yarn is coming out of here. So you might have to position it so that you remember to have it behind your project. And we're just going to slip stitch through all of those first of all, and that just joins our yarn to our project. We're then going to be working through both sides at the same time, but I'm only going to be working through the back loop of my stitches and ideally my chains as well. So what we're going to be doing is we could do a single crochet all the way up, but it's going to create a seam and a ridge, and we don't want to do that. So we are going to do something a little bit more fiddly to give us a perfect finish. We're going to be inserting our hook through the back loop only, which is a little bit fiddly to start, on both panels, going from the right side out the back, and then we pull through and slip stitch through the loops on our hook, and we're just going to repeat that the whole way up. So we come through the back loop, move that yarn out of the way, through the next back loop, which is quite hard to do on camera, sorry, and then we're slip stitching through all of these loops on our hook. So through the back loop of the next stitch or chain, and then the same on the next panel, and we're yarning over, slip stitching through the remaining loops. And what this is going to give is, it doesn't look much right now, but it gives us a beautiful flat join to our cardigan edge. With your chains, it might be a little bit more difficult just to pick up one loop of them, but it can be done. This is not the best position for me to do this. I would probably do this on my lap actually, if I'm honest. But it will also allow you to make sure that you're working through the same point on your cardigan as well, because obviously your edges should be matching. So now I'm going into my next stitch. Back loop, slip stitch through the loops. You can of course whip stitch this together from the wrong side if you want to, but if you get this technique right, not only will it become your favourite way to join your granny squares, it will just become your favourite join ever, because it is almost invisible when you're working it in the same colour as your yarn, as you will see in a moment when I put mine down. So it just looks like we've got these stitches joined together almost magically. It would help if my ends weren't there, they'd look a lot prettier. But you can see that it's just literally completely flat joined. There's no seam on either side. It's completely invisible. So yes, it is a little bit fiddly to work this flat slip stitch seam, but it is pretty much invisible. For me, it's really worth the effort. Of course, if you have your own preferred joining method, you can of course do that. I will most definitely be taking the time to work this, and I'm going to use the same technique to join my shoulders as well. So continue on joining your back panels to each other all the way up to the top, and I will meet you there. So once you have finished joining up your panels, the next thing we need to do is to pin into place our sleeves. So let me just turn this. This is now upside down, just so I can show you everything at once. So what I've done is I've found that last chain 3 corner space on the back panel, and I'm joining it to where I had my front panel marked, because that's where, then that should mean I can pin together the other 2 chain 3 spaces to create our sleeve. You may be looking at this and thinking, oh, it looks like a bit of a bell sleeve. Rest assured that when you're wearing your cardigan, the bell sleeve look will be less. The reason that none of the squares are any bigger than the design states is so that you don't end up with these absolutely massive sleeves. So this is the biggest a sleeve will get. So whichever size you're making up to a 5XL, that's as big as the sleeves get, and that was quite intentional. I have tried this on because I've pinned both my sleeves in place on the front panel, and I'm actually really pleased. I added an extra couple of rows in at the back because this is now the space down the front, so it's quite a wide front. I haven't added anything on to my front panel because my size doesn't need it. Obviously that is up to you, but I've got these all ready to join, and just like we've joined the back panel, that is the inside, that's the right side, I'm going to join my sleeves in the exact same fashion. So I'm going to use the flat slip stitch seam once again, and we are literally going to join all the way up, working through our stitches up to that chain 3 space and across. I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to work across where I've worked my back panels, and where I've joined I'm just going to continue all the way across, working a slip stitch through nice and evenly. I don't want to cause it to bunch, and then we can just repeat that join all the way back down to this seam here. And then I'm just going to work through those back loops of my stitches and my chain space all the way up, and then we can add on the extra length we want starting in our next colour to work on additional rounds, which will be worked the whole way around the cardigan. Once you've done all your seaming, we are ready to work the final section. Again, this is completely optional, but if you don't want to add any extra length, weave in all those ends and go and get wearing. For us who would like to add as much or as little extra length as you need, this is how we're going to do it. So I have my 2 front panels. You can see that I've got the join of my back panel here. I have to try and stop resisting moving them together. So because my last round was the wrong side, I'm joining my yarn with the right side facing me. Depending on which way you've joined your cardigan, ideally you want to be working in the other direction. So if you have the right side of your last round worked in your hexagon facing you, I'd recommend that you turn it, and you'd have to start on the other side. So we're just going to join in the first chain 3-corner space in the direction that you're working. I'm literally just going to place my hook through that chain 3, and I'm working into my third colour, so I'm reverting back to my third colour because obviously I've finished on this round. So I'm going to, sorry, excuse my dog. We're going to start, at least I'm going to start with my pink, which I think was colour 3 for me. I'm just going to place that on. I'm going to not bring it through and knot it just so it's in the right place. And very similar to what we were doing when we worked these back panels, we're going to start with a chain of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This chain 5 counts as a double crochet and a chain 2, and we're going to skip over the first V-stitch, working into the chain 1 spaces between our V-stitches, working 3 double crochets. That's 1, 2, and 3. We can then chain 1 to skip over the next V-stitch, ready to work 3 double crochets and a chain 1 into the next. We're going to repeat this all the way around, working 3 double crochets and a chain 1. That's not 3. Working 3 double crochets and a chain 1 across the bottom of our hexagon. We're going to repeat this all the way around, and at some point you're going to reach some row ends. So let me just turn my cardigan for a moment. So as we continue around our hexagon, we're going to, rogue end. We're going to reach the point where we started working our back panel rows, and I'm going to meet you at that chain 3 space that we joined on to work those back panels, so we can work evenly across here to make sure we get a straight line at the bottom of our cardigan. So once you've worked all the way across to that chain 3 corner space, make sure you've worked that last chain 1. We now need to work across these row ends and into this seam. When we're working across our row ends, normally when we've got a chain 3 like we have here, we would work, say, 2 single crochets evenly across each row end. So you can kind of add up how many row ends you have, so and count the stitches. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I've got 12 stitches, and I want to place my granny stitch along here. So really, I probably only need 3, would be 12 stitches, including the chain 1 spaces. So then we just need to look roughly where we're going to place them. So I'm going to go into that row end there and work my 3 double crochets. Hope nothing comes undone. And do a chain 1, and that looks like a similar space to the one we've just worked. So if I do 1 there, and maybe do 1 into this chain here, and then 1 into that row end, and that will be my 3 across. So you need to do a bit of your own maths on this one. I wouldn't normally leave you to your own devices, but you're perfectly capable of counting the number of rows that you've worked, because obviously you may well vary it to what is written, and just work evenly across, working 3 double crochets and a chain 1 across your row ends. I'm going to make my chain 1 and have a little look and make sure, pull that up for a moment, and make sure that that is looking pretty even. It's not pulling those rows in. Well, that worked. Now I'm going to work into the middle of my seam as well. So just to clarify how I calculated how many groups of 3 double crochets I needed to work, I counted the rows. So I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, times that by 2, which gave me 12 stitches. And then I've worked 1, 2, 3 groups of 3 plus my chain 1 spaces, gives me roughly that amount. So I hope that helps you calculate how many you need to do, but you're looking for it to look pretty much the same as it has over here. So not much stretched out or too tight or anything. We're going to work 3 double crochets into our seam as well. So that's 1, 2 and 3, remembering our chain 1. And then we're going to do the same number back to our next chain 3 corner space. I'm going to look at where I've placed them. So I worked into the bottom of that purple row there. So just going to place them in the same spot. And I don't have to do the maths twice. So at the end of that one, it was into that chain actually. And then a final one just at the bottom. And get to that one there. I'm pulling out an end here, I think. So once you've worked all the way across, it should not be pulling the seam apart. It's, you know, and you shouldn't be putting any tension on this fabric at all. And we don't need to worry about this again because now we've got the nice chain spaces to work into. I just pulled that out. Quickly redo that one. Oh, and we are back to our chain 3 corner space where we're going to continue to work all the way around, working those 3 double crochets and a chain 1 all the way back around the bottom of our hexagon back to our next chain 3 space. So continue around and I will meet you for row 2. So once you've worked all the way back around to your next chain 3 space, you've worked 1 chain 1, we need to do another chain 1, and then we're ending with a double crochet into that chain 3 space. We're then going to change to our next colour in our own colour sequences, because at this point I don't know what colour you're working with, but I'm going back to my purple. And we're making a chain of 4, and then we can turn our work. So our chain 4 counts as a double crochet and a chain 1, and we're going to work a double crochet into the same stitch, working that double crochet into the same space or stitch as our chain 4 to create a little mini V-stitch. Into this same chain 2 space we're working our 3 double crochet spike. So we're working a double crochet and then we're spiking down into that V-stitch underneath to work that long double crochet before working just behind back into that same chain 2 space for that 3rd double crochet. We do our chain 1 to step across, and then we're working into those chain 1 spaces, working that spike granny stitch or 3 double crochet spiked all the way across, ending with a chain 1 in between. Of course, once we get back to where we're working across our back panels, that's where I'm going to meet you. This is all twisted now, hang on. Because obviously we don't have an actual V-stitch to work into, so we're going to have to spike into the stitch below or the bottom of the row. So continue working across and I'll meet you when you reach where you worked across your back panels, and then we can work those spike stitches across our back panels when we get there. So I've worked all the way along with my spike stitches and I've reached the first point where there isn't actually a V-stitch to work into. So I've worked my first double crochet and I'm simply going to work into the space between the next row Normally we spike 2 rows down, and that's not far off. It's about as good as it's going to get because there is no clear indication as to where we need to work. And the same with the next one. So I just need to do my chain 1, stepping across, and I'm going to work actually into, got a tiny space that I can insert my hook into, just kind of into that space. It's pretty much as good as we can get without having a V-stitch to work into. So there's those first 2. I want to make them as straight as I can. Chain 1 to go across, and I'm going to go into a space underneath between the rows, and just bring your hook up to the same height as normal. There's only a few rows to do this on. Make sure you do that chain 1 in between. On this one, I kind of need to go in there. Just going to kind of aim for the middle. And how are they looking? Yeah, not too bad. No one would know, would they? I love it. There are times where you kind of have to trust your own judgment. I trust you. You're not going to wear it if it looks terrible. So just take your time, place it, have a look to see what it looks like when it's done, and then move on to the next one. Don't overthink it. Don't spend a lot of time on this because you only have to do it for this row. And realistically, no one is going to be paying much attention. You would never know, would you? There's barely any difference in the transition from these ones to these ones. I can barely see it myself. Continue all the way around to your next, to the end of this row, and I'll meet you there ready for row 3. So I've continued to work across, working that spiked V-stitch, and I'm back to that beginning chain space. And we're going to work our 3 double crochet spike into that V-stitch below, work back into that chain space. Don't forget to work that last chain 1. I was so keen to get into that chain, there we are, to complete that row. And I'm changing back to start a new ball to finish off that stitch. So for row 3, just like we did for our back panels, we start with a chain of 4, and we work a, oh my God, I can't see, and we're working a second double crochet into, working a second double crochet into the same as our chain 4. So we skip that first double crochet and work into the next, placing our V-stitch. Chain 1 and a second double crochet. We then V-stitch, we then chain 1. We skip over that chain 1 space, skip the next double crochet, working our V-stitch in the stitch above that long double crochet. Just as we've been doing the whole way throughout our pattern, and make sure we work a chain 1 in between. Now, there's nothing different at this point to work on this row, so you can just continue all the way across working your V-stitches, because when you reach where that back panel was, there is nothing different anymore. We're just working our stitches as normal. So for row 3, we are just working, we're just working our V-stitch into that spike stitch from the previous row, followed by a chain 1. So it looks just like our previous rows that we've worked before. So keep working all the way across, and I'll meet you at the end of row 3. So this row went a lot quicker without having extra work to do over that back panel. And once you've reached the end and worked that final V-stitch, we're going to join into that third chain. Make sure I pull that tight. So 1, 2, 3. And that just helps to keep our edges nice and straight. And I am changing back, an extra one, changing back again, and we're on row 4. We're starting with a chain of 4, and we're doing our V-stitch row. So we're simply working into the chain 1 spaces between our V-stitches, so nothing special to start this row off. Just working our V-stitch, followed by a chain 1 into each chain 1 space between the V-stitches of the previous row. Nice easy row this. So once you've worked row 4, you can continue to repeat rows 1 to 4 as many times as you like to achieve the desired finished length of your cardigan. The final thing to do is, of course, weave in all those ends, and then there is an optional edging which is going to work all the way around the open edge of your cardigan, so all the way up around the front. It is entirely optional, but I'm definitely going to be adding on something to cover up these chains here. I've continued on and done a few more repeats. As you can see, that's the edge of the front corner of the hexagon, and I've added quite a few inches on because I like a little bit of additional length. So I've added about another 4.5 inches onto the length because I like certain things on my body a little bit covered. I've fastened off everything. I've weaved in most. I'm ignoring those for a moment. We'll come back to them. But I am going to rejoin with the right side of my cardigan facing, just to work an edging all the way up and around, just to cover up these row ends. It is optional. I think it's going to make a really nice finish to this cardigan. So I don't need that colour. And I'm just gonna, this is where I fastened off, but I wanted to see where that was. Also, that's where I rejoined my final colour. And I'm gonna rejoin with the right side of my cardigan facing. So this was where I rejoined my final round. So before you rejoin, make sure you have the right side of your cardigan facing. And I'm going to join in the 3rd chain from where I originally joined. So on that last round, we're looking for the 3rd chain. Obviously, if you've worked more rounds or less rounds, you might already have a stitch facing you. So once you just double check you have the right side facing, because otherwise your final round will be looking a little bit messy. You'll be seeing the wrong side of your stitch. I'm just going to rejoin in the 3rd chain, so we still have that nice chain 1 space and help keep the shape of our corner. I've made a little chain 1 and I'm working back into where I've rejoined and made that chain 1. If I can find that end. I'm just going to make a single crochet into that same place. She says, there we go. And then because we're working across these row ends, they are the same as a chain, as a double crochet. So I'm aiming to work 2 double crochets per row end back to that final chain 3 corner space of our hexagon. So there's my first one. I'm just going to work around this chain here before working into the end of that row. Get that loose thread as well. Oh my, a little bit tricky. There we go. So that was 2. So now that I worked into the top of that row, I want to work into my chain here. So I'm going to try and pick up 2 strands of that. This must be a turning chain. It's a little bit fiddly, but it's worth picking up 2 because it will show that you've worked into it and you'll leave the colour behind, if that makes sense. Then work into the top of the next row before repeating it and working into the stitch or chain 3. You want to make sure that you're not bunching these stitches up. If you need to work a couple of additional stitches, then of course you can do. I'm going to go into the base here to work that next one. Can just work around this one here. So there we go, because it is the same colour. What we're looking to do is to neaten the edge. That's all we're doing. We don't want to hide the colour. So you see how I've worked into those chains. It leaves a little bit of that colour of that row behind. And it's just going to be a nice edging. Nothing special, but nice enough just to cover up those row ends. So I'm going to continue to repeat working into each row end and then into the chain 3 or stitch. So we're working 2 stitches per row end. Trying to get 2 loops of these chains is a little bit fiddly, but it is worth the effort. We don't have to do too much of it. We're nearly there already. If you haven't added any extra length, you don't really have to do this bit. I think that end's woven in. So just working into the row end and then working into the chain 3. And just repeating that up to the chain 3 corner space of our hexagon. So once you've worked up to your chain 3 corner space, you should have a very neat edge looking a little bit like that. I'm really pleased with how that's come out. Is it perfect? Probably not. Is it good enough? 100%. So I'm going to remove this stitch marker finally. And into that chain 3 corner space, we're going to treat that as a row end. So we just work 1 single crochet, and then we have our V stitches from our final round. So we're working a single crochet into the top of the stitch, into the chain 1, and into the top of the next. We're then going to repeat that all the way. So working into the chain 1, into the top of the stitch, and then into the chain 1 in between your V stitch as well, and into the top of your next double crochet. So we're not actually increasing the number of stitches that we're working, it's just continuing that neat edge. We're just going to repeat that all the way up. So working into the chain 1 space, then across our V stitch, working into our double crochet, into the chain 1, and into the top of that next double crochet. I'm going to repeat that all the way up, and I will meet you, I promise. I'll meet you once you reach your shoulder seam, and we'll join around this corner to give a nice, almost a bit of a curved edge. I'll see you shortly. So I've worked all the way up to the chain 3 space, and I've worked into that V stitch here, and we're going to work a single crochet 3 together to create a small, not a bunching up, but just to curve the shoulder a little bit. So we're going to insert our hook into that chain 3 space, yarn over, bring a loop up, insert our hook into our seam, bring up a 3rd loop, and then insert our hook into the 1st stitch of our neckline, bring up a 4th loop, yarn over, pull through all 4 loops, and it won't be quite so obvious right now, but it stops the neck being a little bit too squared off, which sounds silly. It just gives a nice, almost seamless join across the seam into the neckline. Once you've worked your 3 single crochets together, we're going to work into each stitch across the neck to the last stitch before your seam, and then we're going to work that 3 single crochets together again. So we're just continuing across, working 1 single crochet into each stitch across. And then once we've reached that stitch before our seam, we're going to repeat that single crochet 3 together. So we're inserting into the next, yarn over, bring a loop up, insert into your seam, kind of through that top slip stitch, which is going to be a little bit tricky if it's any as tight as mine. Oh, no, can't get through there. Yarn over, bring a loop up, and then into the chain 3 space to bring up your 4th loop, pull through all 4 loops, and it just brings them together to curve your neckline, and then we're back to working into our V stitches and those chain 1 spaces. So you work into your double crochet, chain 1 space, into the top of the next double crochet, and then of course into that chain 1 space between the V stitches. We're going to repeat that all the way down to our row ends. Mine start here at that last chain 3 corner space, and that's where I'll meet you. So I've worked all the way back down to my final chain 3 corner space. I'm going to work into that chain 3 space before working into the row ends once again. A little bit trickier on this side because you'll have the stitches to work into. So that's the row end, and then I need to work through what looks like a chain 3, just like we did on the other side. One side is always easier. There we go. And just making sure that we're placing 2 single crochets along these row ends and into making sure that we're working those 2 single crochets across each row end. And then once you have, of course, worked back to your last stitch, in my case, or chain 3, you can fasten off and weave any remaining ends, and your cardigan will be complete. Thank you so much for joining me for this tutorial. I will see you in the next video.